morning my daughter called me a burden, I was standing at my own kitchen sink, washing the same coffee mug I'd washed every morning for 31 years. She didn't say it directly. She never does. What she said was, "Mum, don't you think this house is too big for just one person?" And the way she said it, with that little pause before one person, like she wanted the weight of those two words to settle into my chest, I knew, I knew that conversation had been rehearsed, probably in my own guest bedroom with my son-in-law nodding along. I didn't answer her right away. I set the mug down on the drying rack, dried my hands on the dish towel that's been hanging from the oven handle since before she was born, and said, "The coffee's ready if you want some." I should back up. My name is Dorothy, and I'm 64 years old. I live in the same house in Greenville, South Carolina, that my late husband Raymond and I bought in 1991. 4 bedrooms, 2.5 baths, a backyard with a magnolia tree that Raymond planted the spring our daughter was born. We raised her here, we buried her father from here, and after 31 years, I know every creak in every floorboard and every draft that comes through the kitchen window when the temperature drops in October. Raymond passed 4 years ago. Pancreatic cancer. 6 weeks from diagnosis to gone. That's how fast it happened. We didn't have time to say half the things we should have said. I spent the first year after he died just trying to remember how to be a person who existed in the world without him. My daughter, Simone, is 36. She works in marketing for a tech company, mostly remote now. Her husband, Marcus, is in construction management. They got married 6 years ago in a beautiful ceremony in Charleston. I paid for a significant portion of that wedding, not because they asked, but because Raymond and I had set aside money for exactly that moment, and it felt like honoring him to use it. For the first few years of their marriage, things were fine. They had an apartment in Charlotte. We talked on Sundays. Simone came down for holidays. It was a normal, healthy distance, the kind where you miss each other just enough to be genuinely glad when you're together. Then Marcus's company had layoffs. Not him specifically, but his division was restructured and his hours got cut significantly. Around the same time, their lease was up and their landlord raised the rent by $400 a month. I remember Simone calling me on a Tuesday evening, her voice careful in that way she gets when she wants something but hasn't decided how to ask yet. "We've been thinking," she said, "just temporarily, just until Marcus gets stable again. Maybe 3 or 4 months." I want to be honest about this part. I said yes because I love my daughter, and because the house was quiet in a way that sometimes felt like it had a sound of its own, and because Raymond would have said yes, and part of me was still making decisions the way I thought he would have wanted. They moved in on a Saturday in March, 2 years and 8 months ago. The first month was actually fine. Simone cooked dinner twice a week, which I appreciated. Marcus fixed the gutter on the east side of the house that had been sagging since the previous fall. We watched TV together some evenings. I told myself this was nice. This was family. But there's something that happens when an arrangement is called temporary and then doesn't end. The word temporary starts to lose its shape. It becomes elastic, and then it disappears entirely. By month 3, Marcus had gotten a new full-time position. I remember feeling genuinely relieved. I thought, okay, now they'll start looking for a place. They didn't. There was talk about saving up, about the housing market being impossible right now, about how it just made more sense to wait another few months. I nodded and said I understood, because I did understand. I just also understand things end. Somewhere around month 5, I noticed Simone had rearranged the pantry. I opened the cabinet where I kept my canned goods for 15 years and found them moved to a lower shelf to make room for the protein powders and specialty flours she and Marcus preferred. It sounds small. I know it sounds small. But I stood there for a moment and felt something I couldn't immediately name. I named it later. It was the feeling of being a guest in my own home. I didn't say anything about the pantry. I reorganized it back the way it was when they were at the grocery store, and when Simone opened it that evening and noticed, she said, "Oh, I thought the other way was more efficient." And I said pleasantly, "I'd been using this pantry for 30 years, sweetheart. I know where everything is." She smiled and said, "Sure, Mum," and the subject was dropped. But it wasn't dropped. It was just moved underground where these things grow. Marcus started working from the dining room table, which I didn't mind at first. But the dining room has always been where I do my own work. I do bookkeeping part-time for 3 small local businesses, have for years, and gradually, without anything being said directly, it became understood that the dining room was Marcus's office between 9 and 5. I started taking my laptop to my bedroom. Think about that for a moment. I moved my workspace to my bedroom in my own home. Simone started making comments about the house itself, subtle ones, always framed as suggestions or questions. Don't you think the living room would feel bigger without the armoire? That armoire was Raymond's grandmother's. Have you thought about repainting? This beige is very 90s. I chose that paint color the summer Raymond and I spent 3 weekends redoing every room. Do we really need the landline? Nobody uses landlines anymore. We keep the landline because my sister in Augusta calls on it, and because Raymond's mother, who is 87, knows that number by heart. I kept the armoire. I kept the paint. I kept the landline. I want to be clear, my son-in-law, Marcus, is not a bad man. He was always polite to me. He said please and thank you. He brought in the groceries when I bought them. But there is a particular kind of passivity that functions like a weapon, and Marcus had it down. He would let Simone make a comment that was clearly out of line and say nothing, not agreeing out loud, but not disagreeing either. Just there, occupying space, allowing it. After the first year, I gently raised the subject of a timeline. I waited for a Sunday when the mood was good, when we'd had a nice lunch, when no one was in the middle of anything stressful. I said, I've loved having you both here, and I want to make sure we're on the same page about what the plan looks like going forward. Simone said they were still saving. Marcus nodded. I asked if they had a number in mind, a target, something concrete. Simone said the market was unpredictable. I said I understood, and that I wasn't trying to rush them, but that it would help me to have some sense of direction. What happened next is the thing I've turned over in my mind more times than I can count. Simone looked at me, not unkindly, but with something that was almost like patience, the way you look at someone who doesn't quite understand the situation, and said, Mom, this house is going to be ours eventually anyway. The room was very quiet after that. I said, I'm sorry, she said. I just mean, long term. We're your family. We're going to be here for you. I let it go that day. I shouldn't have, but I let it go. What I did instead was start paying attention. I started noticing things I'd been too generous to notice before. The way Simone would make decisions about shared spaces, new throw pillows in the living room, a new soap dispenser in the guest bathroom that was now their bathroom, without asking. The way Marcus had started using the second garage bay for his equipment storage, so my car sat outside. Small things. But small things are how you get to the big things. I also called my attorney. I want to explain something about that decision. I'm not a suspicious person by nature. I'm not litigious. I don't go through the world looking for conflict. But I have a friend, Beverly, who went through something similar with her son about 10 years ago. And when the dust settled, Beverly had signed papers she didn't fully understand and spent 3 years in a legal situation that cost her far more than she could afford. I wasn't going to be Beverly. My attorney's name is Carol, and she's been handling my affairs since Raymond died. I called her on a Wednesday afternoon and I explained the situation. She listened carefully. Then she asked me a few questions. Was my name the only one on the deed? Had I ever added anyone to any financial accounts? Had I signed anything at all that involved the property? I hadn't. Good, she said. Keep it that way. She also said something that I wrote down in my journal that night. Your home is yours until you decide otherwise, not until your family decides otherwise. I started keeping notes, not because I wanted to build a case, but because I realized my memory of individual incidents was blurring together, and I wanted clarity. Dates, what was said, what was moved or changed. I kept the notebook in my nightstand. About a month after that conversation with Carol, Simone brought up the house directly. We were in the kitchen after dinner. Marcus had gone to watch TV, and she started talking about long-term planning. She said she and Marcus had been thinking about what would make the most sense financially. She said that with Raymond gone, and with the house being as large as it was, and with the cost of everything going up, wouldn't it make more sense for them to be formally on the deed? Not to own it, she said quickly, just to be on it, for practical purposes. For when things happened. I looked at my daughter across the kitchen table that Raymond and I had bought at an estate sale 20 years ago. And I thought about all the things she didn't know about me. She didn't know that I had refinanced this house 8 years ago and used the equity to make investments on Raymond's advice, investments that had grown considerably. She didn't know that I had been quietly moving money for the past year into accounts she had no visibility into. She didn't know that I'd met with Carol twice more since that first phone call. She didn't know that I'd updated my estate documents completely, with specific detailed language about this property and its disposition. She didn't know any of that because she hadn't asked about me. She'd asked about the house. I said, "Let me think about it." She smiled. She thought that meant yes. 2 weeks later was a Thursday in November. It was around 10 in the evening. I was already in bed reading when my phone rang. Simone's name on the screen. When I answered, I could hear immediately that something was wrong. Her voice was tight, somewhere between upset and angry. She said they'd had a small accident, nothing serious, everyone was fine, but the car had some damage and the estimate was coming in around $6,000. Their deductible was high, they were short on cash because of some recent expenses. She needed to know if I could loan them the money, $6,000. I asked her what recent expenses had left them short. There was a pause, and then she mentioned a vacation they'd taken in September, a week in Cancun that I'd seen pictures of on Instagram, and some furniture they'd bought for their room. I asked if Marcus's income had changed again. She said no. I lay there in my bed, in my house, in the room I'd slept in for over 30 years, and I said, "Simone, I'm not going to be able to help with that." She said, "What?" I said, "I don't think it's good for either of us for me to be your emergency fund. I love you." And the answer is no. I want to tell you that she handled it gracefully. She did not. She said things that I won't repeat in full, but the substance of it was that I was selfish, that I didn't understand how hard things were for their generation, that she'd sacrificed things to be here, that this was going to be her house anyway, so I might as well be helpful now. That last part, this was going to be her house anyway. I said, "Good night, Simone," and I ended the call. I didn't sleep well that night, but not for the reasons you might think. I wasn't hurt, or not only hurt. I was clear. I was clearer than I'd been in almost 3 years, because when someone finally says out loud what they've been thinking quietly for a long time, it's almost a relief. The pretending is over. The next morning I called Carol. 2 days later, on a Saturday morning, I sat down with Simone and Marcus at the kitchen table, and I said what I had to say. I had my notebook with me. I didn't open it, but I wanted them to see it. I told them that I'd loved having them here, that I'd meant that, and that it was over. I gave them 60 days, which was more than the law required, and more than some would say they deserved. I told them there would be no changes to the deed, not now, not in the future under these circumstances. I told them I had reviewed my estate documents, and those were my private business, but they should not make financial plans based on assumptions about this house. Marcus stared at the table. Simone said, "You're being dramatic." I said, "I've been patient for 2 years and 9 months. I don't think I'm being dramatic. I think I'm being clear, maybe for the first time." She said, "And what if we don't go?" I said. "Then Carol does." She knew who Carol was. They were gone in 43 days. Not 60. 43. The morning after they left, I woke up at 6:15 the way I always do, and I walked down to my kitchen and I made my coffee. I stood at the sink, and I looked out the window at the magnolia tree in the backyard, the one Raymond planted the spring Simone was born. It was December, and the leaves were gone, just the shape of it against the pale morning sky. I thought about what I could have done differently, and I came up with some things. I should have set terms in writing from the beginning, a formal agreement, a move-out date, clear expectations. I should have had the deed conversation with Carol the moment Simone made that comment about the house being theirs eventually. I should have trusted the feeling I had the day I found my pantry rearranged, because that feeling wasn't pettiness. That feeling was information. But I also think about what I did right. I paid attention. I asked for help before I needed it urgently. I didn't let love make me dishonest about what was actually happening. And when the moment came, I used my own voice at my own table in my own house. Simone and I don't talk much now. She's called twice since they left. Once to tell me they found an apartment in Charlotte, which I was genuinely glad to hear, and once on my birthday in February. That call was short and a little stilted, and when we hung up, I sat for a while with what it felt like. It felt like grief, and it also felt like honesty. And I've learned that sometimes those two things come in the same moment. The magnolia will bloom again in March or April. It always does. Raymond planted it for her. But it grows in my yard, and I'm the one who has tended it for 35 years, through every winter, every dry summer, every storm that came through and shook the branches down to nothing. It's still standing. So am I. There's something I've come to understand about the way consequences work. Not the dramatic movie version kind, but the quiet, accumulating kind that most people don't see until they're standing right in the middle of them. What happened in my home over those 2 years and 9 months didn't start with a phone call or a conversation about the deed. It started much earlier, with every moment I stayed quiet when I should have spoken. Every time I moved my laptop to the bedroom and told myself it was fine. Every time I rearranged my own pantry in secret because I didn't want to cause tension. Those silences had a cost. Not just to me, to Simone too. Because when you let something go on too long without naming it, you're not being kind. You're letting the other person build a version of reality that will eventually collapse on both of you. I think about the woman I was when Raymond was alive, and I know she would have set terms on day one. A move-in date, a move-out date, clear expectations, all of it written down. Raymond was the kind of man who believed that clarity was a form of love, that saying the hard thing early saved everyone from the harder thing later. I knew that. I'd lived that for 30 years. And then I got lonely, and I got soft, and I traded clarity for company. That's not a judgment on myself. It's just what happened. What I did right, and I want to be honest about this because it matters, was that I didn't lose myself entirely. Somewhere underneath the accommodation and the quiet patience, there was still a woman who knew the difference between generosity and surrender. When Simone said, "This house will be ours eventually," something in me went very still. Not angry, not hurt, still, like a door closing, and I listened to that stillness. I called Carol. I started writing things down. I moved slowly and carefully, the way you do when you finally understand that the stakes are real. That took something. Not stubbornness. Something more honest than that. It took being willing to see my own daughter clearly, without the softening filter of how much I loved her. It took sitting with the discomfort of knowing that doing the right thing would cost me something I wanted, her closeness, her approval, the version of our relationship where everything was fine. I had to be willing to lose that in order to keep myself. Simone is smart. She always has been. But intelligence without integrity will eventually turn against the people closest to you, and I think some part of her knew, even then, that what she was doing wasn't right. Marcus knew too. That's why he stared at the table. Knowing something is wrong and doing it anyway. That gap is where the real damage lives for everyone involved. I didn't win anything that December morning when I sat down at my kitchen table and said what I had to say. There's no prize for protecting what's already yours. But I walked out of that conversation still standing in my own life, in my own home, with my own name on the deed, and my own sense of myself intact. And I've learned that's not a small thing, that's everything. The magnolia will bloom again in spring. It always does, and I'll be here to see it.